All right, today we're going to break down one of the most common, yet absolutely devastating security flaws out there, SQL injection. Let's just dive right in, because what you're about to see is the engine behind some of the biggest hacks in history. Let's start with a number, 150,000. Just let that sit there for a second. What is that? Well, that's how many customer records, including their private banking details, were leaked in a single, very public incident. And how about this number? 60 million pounds. Now, when you see a number that big, you're probably thinking, okay, this has to be some super complex nation-state level hack, right? But the crazy part is, no. The reality is actually way simpler and frankly, a lot scarier. It all boiled down to a classic, almost textbook vulnerability. Yeah, we're talking about the big 2015 TalkTalk breach. It's just a perfect, if, really painful, example of what happens when a system is vulnerable to SQL injection. This wasn't some complex genius-level exploit. Think of it more like a digital typo with a 60 million pound price tag. Okay, so what is this thing that can cause so much chaos? Let's get right into it and break down the fundamental flaw behind SQL injection. This is really where the magic or the mayhem happens. Okay, so at its heart, SQL injection, or SQLi for short, is basically an attack where a hacker slips their own database commands into a spot where the application is just expecting normal user data, like username. The real problem here, the absolute key, is that the application trusts that user input way too much. It just mashes it all together with its own commands. Let's make this super concrete. Think about any login form you've ever filled out. When you hit enter, what's happening? Well, behind the scenes, the server takes your username and password and builds a little question, a query, to ask the database if you're legit. And a totally normal, secure-looking query, it would look something like this. It's basically asking the database, hey, can you find me a user where the username is admin and the password matches password 123? Super simple, right? If both things are true, you're in. But, and this is the big but, what happens if the application isn't careful about how it puts that question together? Suddenly, an attacker doesn't even need to guess the password. All they have to do is type something a little bit clever into the username box. And look at this. The difference is so tiny, it's almost funny. A legit user just types in admin. But the attacker, they type admin, followed by a single quote and 2 little dashes. That's it. That is the entire hack. That's the 60 million pound typo. So how on earth does that break everything? Well, because the application just blindly jams that malicious text into its command, the database ends up seeing a completely different question than the one the developer intended. And here it is. This is the magic trick. That little single quote the attacker added, it tricks the database into thinking the username part is finished. Then, those 2 little dashes. In the world of SQL, that means, hey, whatever comes next is just a comment, so ignore it. The entire password check, poof, it's gone. The database completely ignores it. The query now just asks, hey, do you have a user named admin? If the answer is yes, you're in. No password required. And that was just a simple login bypass, which is already pretty scary. But attackers have a whole playbook of tricks to do way more damage. Let's take a peek inside their toolkit to see how they build on the simple idea. So the trick we just saw, that's a classic authentication bypass. But it gets way more interesting. With a union-based attack, a hacker can basically staple their own malicious question onto the application's real one. It's like tricking the database into not only giving you the info you asked for, but also adding a whole secret list of every other user's email and password right onto the end of it. And then you have blind SQI. This one is sneaky. It's for when the app doesn't show you any helpful error messages. It's like playing a game of 20 questions with the database, asking it a bunch of true or false questions to slowly piece together secrets, one character at a time. It's slow, for sure, but man, is it effective. Okay, I know this all sounds pretty terrifying, and you're probably wondering, if this attack is so old and well-known, why are we still talking about it? Well, it usually comes down to old code, tight deadlines, or just people not knowing the risks. But here's the good news. And this is really important. Preventing SQL injection is actually surprisingly straightforward. This next part is the most critical section of this whole explainer. This is the golden shield. Okay, if you learn one thing today, let it be this slide. On the left, you've got the dangerous way. You're literally just smashing strings together, mixing the user's data right in with your code. This is how vulnerabilities are born. But on the right, that's the secure way. It's called parameterized queries. See how there are placeholders? The query goes to the database first, then the user's data is sent separately. The database itself handles putting them together safely. This way, the user's input is always treated as data and it can never, ever be mistaken for code. Now, while those parameterized queries are your #1 weapon, a really strong defense always has layers. You can use something called an ORM. That stands for Object Relational Mapper. Think of it like a smart translator that often writes these secure queries for you. Then there's the principle of least privilege. It's a fancy term for a simple idea. Your app's database account should only have the absolute minimum permissions it needs, nothing more. A web application firewall, or a WAF, can act like a security guard at the front door, blocking common attack patterns before they even get to your code. And finally, a simple one. Never show detailed database errors to your users. That's like giving an attacker a free roadmap to your system. All right, so we've gone through the theory, we've seen the real-world impact, and we've covered the solution. Now, let's talk about how you can actually put this knowledge into practice. Seriously, if you walk away with just one single idea today, I want it to be this. This is the mental model that stops SQL injection dead in its tracks. User input is data. It should never be treated as part of the code. That's it. Look, the best way to really truly get this stuff is to get your hands dirty, but, in a safe and legal way. These platforms right here, Portswigger's Web Security Academy, Hack the Box, and TryHackMe, they are all fantastic, well-respected places to practice these concepts for real, without getting into any trouble. So we'll leave you with this. You've seen how just a couple of misplaced characters can cause a £60 million disaster. But you've also seen the simple, elegant fix. You know the defense now. So the only question left is your code ready?